Hi everyone. Today we will understand what are resource requests and resource limits in Kubernetes. Imagine you are a developer and you have written code to create a web application or an API. To run these applications, we need some nodes or servers. For that, here I am taking three nodes within a cluster: node 1, node 2 and node 3. On top of these nodes, we can have operating systems like Ubuntu, Windows or Red Hat. We also need computing capacity such as CPU and RAM. Some applications requires more computing capacity and some requires less computing capacity depending on the workload. After having all these and packaging all the required dependencies and code, we deploy our application as a container inside a pod, and the pod will run on any available node. For example, let's say the first pod is placed on node 2, like how Kubernetes assigning pod to a node. Now, let's see what are these resource requests and resource limits and why we need them. So, what is resource request? Resource request is the minimum amount of CPU or memory a container inside a pod is guaranteed to get. Kubernetes uses this value to choose a node that has enough free resources. Then, on the other hand, limit is the maximum amount of CPU or memory a container is allowed to use. And remember these important points. If the CPU reaches its limit, the container gets throttled, that means slows down. If the memory reaches its limit, the container is killed and the pod restarts again. To understand more better, let's take an example. Let's say node 1 has 8 CPU cores and 32 GB RAM. We consider this as 100% full resource capacity. Now I launch another pod that requires 4 CPU cores and 16 GB RAM. Kubernetes checks which node has enough CPU and RAM, and it assigns the pod to node 1 because node 1 is having more capacity in terms of size and you can see it somewhat bigger. After this, the resource capacity on node 1 is reduced to 50%. Next, I launch two more pods. One pod requires 25% of this 100% capacity. Another pod requires 15% of the total capacity. Now, remaining capacity on node 1 is only 10%. Now, the question here is, if I want to launch another pod that requires 2 CPU cores and 4 GB RAM, can this new pod sit on node 1? Answer is no, because the required capacity for pod is more than the remaining capacity, which is 10% on node 1. So Kubernetes will try to place the pod on node 2 or node 3. If node 2 has enough capacity, it will sit on node 2. Otherwise, it will simply sit on node 3. That will be taken care by Kubernetes. Now let's see how the manifest file for resource request and limits looks like. Are you thinking, is it that much difficult? Answer is absolutely no. If you observe this pod manifest file, under spec section, there are containers block where you can add resource request and limits for the CPU and RAM. Request will give guaranteed resource capacity, where limits will give maximum amount of capacity that container is allowed to use. If you observe again, these resource requests and limits are assigned to the containers. And also remember, If you are able to run and walk, then you are in good state, right? But if you are not able to walk properly and you are always tired, then you will go to the doctor to find your health problem, and doctor gives either some tablets to cure. In similar manner, when the CPU and memory consumption is too high, they also get exhausted, and then you are responsible for finding the root cause and taking appropriate action. That's all for this video. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you really like this video, please click on the like button, and if you are watching for the first time, subscribe to my YouTube channel and don't forget to share with your friends. Thank you.